If you grew up in this type of environment where you needed to be the responsible one, where things felt inconsistent, where you couldn't rely on someone else to follow through because you had to take care of it. So they could not follow through, whether that meant being picked up on time from school or having basic care and reliability. Those experiences don't just stay in the past. They start to link up with contemporary relational moments, and over time they form an internalized narrative. I'm the one who has to make sure everything gets done around here. I can't rely on someone else to carry this through. I'm the only responsible one. And from there, even a small moment, like having to explain how to finish a simple task, can carry an unconscious meaning that this is much larger than what's actually happening in the moment. Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at a very common but often very frustrating relational problem. It often begins with a very familiar scenario. Something hasn't been done around the home. Something has been left sitting for too long, and one partner steps in to take care of it. In this case, the boyfriend takes initiative and tries to clean up something that has been left unattended. What we're going to explore today is a very specific kind of breakdown, where one partner experiences the other as not following through, not completing things properly, and then needing guidance in order to do something that would be so easy and obvious. In that experience, there's often a growing sense of irritation, a feeling of being pulled into a role of having to finish the job or explain or manage it or correct the other person in order for even simple things to get done. And what tends to follow is an escalation that feels justified from the inside because it looks like incompetence on the part of the other person or laziness. But it becomes more complex when we begin to slow it down and track what actually gets activated in the interaction itself. So today, we're going to stay very close to that moment and look at how these situations unfold in real time and why they often carry more emotional complexity than the task itself would suggest. It often starts with something small that's been sitting there for a while, something that both people have noticed, but no one has dealt with it. A mess in the car, a pile of laundry, a light bulb needs to be changed, something in the fridge that's now spoiled and rotting is just sitting there. It lingers, not urgent enough to act on it, but not invisible either. And then one person finally decides to take care of it. And this is where the problem actually starts. Let's continue to explore this prototypical example. In this case, imagine there's food that's been sitting in the refrigerator for too long. It's clearly gone bad. It's moldy, unpleasant, but it hasn't been dealt with. And importantly, it's hers. She knows she left it there. Then, at some point, her boyfriend, she tells me, takes the initiative to clean it up. Without making a big deal about it, he opens the refrigerator, he sees it, and decides to clean it out. There's something almost practical, even helpful in the gesture. He's addressing something that's been left undone. But as he's doing it, he hesitates. The smell is strong, and he's not entirely sure how she wants him to handle it. So he calls out in a fairly neutral tone, but he's yelling across the apartment, and he's asking, what should I do with this? Now, on the surface, it's simple. It's even a reasonable question. But the moment it lands, something shifts in her. Because instead of hearing it as a practical question, it lands with an edge, almost as if something obvious is being missed, or worse, as if something is being subtly handed back to her. Her response comes very quickly. What do you mean, what should you do with it? You put it in the bag and you throw it out. There's a sharpness there, and she tries to show me how inappropriate his question was. In other words, even though he's the one who stepped in and started dealing with something that she had left untouched, he's suddenly in the position of not knowing what he's doing. Out of annoyance and him pressing a bit, she instructs him on how to bag it up, contain the mess. But the job isn't fully finished yet. The bag is still sitting there, tied off, and not taken out to the garbage. So he asks her, "Can you take this out?" And this is where the emotional intensity really escalates, because now the request doesn't register as simply division of labor. It feels like something is being redirected, like the responsibility is being placed on her. And her reaction sharpens even more now, escalating the tension between them. What follows isn't just irritation, it becomes a kind of lecture from her. The lecture, or she talks to him about finishing what you start, about how if you're going to take initiative, you need to follow through. Why do you need to get me involved in the project? And how about you don't just leave something halfway done? So now I can hear in her recounting of this fight, he stepped in to address a problem, but in her own subjective experience, what stands out is that he didn't carry it all the way through. And that's where her focus locks in. She begins to experience him not as someone who's helping, but as someone who's creating more work for her. Someone who starts something and then expects her to manage the rest. And oftentimes, and you could fill this in with your own examples, but sometimes the project doesn't even get started in this way. You know, that sometimes she's nagging or asking and getting caught up in trying to get him to complete a simple project that then remains incomplete, undone, unaddressed, until finally she's pushed into the role of having to either do it herself or to continue to keep after him. But you could get the sense that it starts to feel to her like she has to step in. And that's why I said, please open it up in your own mind. Think about any situation where a project gets undone and then you have to step in, explain something basic, and ensure it gets done properly, as though she's dealing with someone who can't quite complete a simple task all on his own. In other words, why do you have to pull me into this? There's a subtle shift into the parental role where she's no longer just responding to the situation, but she's correcting it. She's overseeing it. She's maybe yelling at him to finish it, maybe even threatening and making sure it's finished. And I quote, the right way from this prototypical example, that there's a right way to do it. And in this version of events, her reaction of annoyance and irritation doesn't just make sense, it feels justified, even necessary. And if you stay there, it can genuinely look like a situation where one person is being careless or incomplete or lazy, and the other person is simply holding the standard. See, that's the manifest story. And as I mentioned, if you stay there, that makes sense. But that version doesn't fully account for how quickly the tone shifted, or why her reaction carries so much intensity, or why the roles seem to reverse so completely in the span of just a few moments. So, if we stay at the level of the interaction, it all tracks. But the intensity, the speed of the shift, her intense feelings suggest that there's something more happening here that we need to slow down and look at more carefully. When a moment organizes this quickly and feels this justified, it's usually pointing to something operating beneath the surface of the interaction. Remember, I said the interaction, the task, the way he goes about it is the manifest level, but it's the intensity of her reaction that I'm zooming in on now. From a psychodynamic perspective, the moment he touches the thing that had been left undone, the moment he brings it out into the open, it's no longer just an object sitting in the background. It becomes visible, defined, harder to ignore. And again, feel free to open this up in your own mind to any task that's not getting completed. Once it's called out, that's what I'm suggesting. Now it's out in the open. Just a reminder that it needs to be done defines it and makes it visible. So instead of the focus remaining on the fact that it has been left there long enough to become a problem, the focus shifts onto him. what he did, what he didn't do, and what he should have done differently. But if we stay with her experience and begin to look at it more closely, something important starts to come into view. On the surface, this looks like he is the lazy one, and I quote because these words are sometimes used, he's the child that can't complete a project. But the story is, of course, and that's why you tune into this podcast, as you know, more complicated. He steps in and cleans something that she left undone. That's a critical piece of the story that we're not hearing. It only gets alluded to. Remember, I mentioned earlier when I first introduced the story, she left something in the fridge. And when I slow this down with her, what starts to emerge is that this moment doesn't just register as helpful, it carries a sense of exposure. And I quote, exposure, that she's being exposed, almost as if she's been called out for something. Can you see that? Can you see what I'm saying here? Because this is not in her conscious mind. I'm going at something just below the level of consciousness, not something she would immediately name. But there seems to be a feeling of being seen in something she hadn't taken care of. And that feeling comes quickly. She tells me that this was something she left in the refrigerator. Remember, I mentioned she kind of just alluded to it. But just as quickly, it gets covered over. You see, it comes and it goes so fast. So instead of staying with the question of what just got stirred in you when he did that, the focus shifts outward, onto him, onto the task, onto what he wasn't doing or what he did incorrectly. You see, so let me just reiterate that. Instead of the question being, what just got stirred in you? See, that's a more reflective way to think about this. It becomes all about the way that he's acting like a selfish child. This leads into a very coherent, overt narrative of his behavior. She becomes the competent one, the one carrying the mental load, the one who sees the whole task through from beginning to end. And he, in contrast, becomes the one who's incomplete, who needs direction, who needs reminding, who can't quite follow through with something to the very end on his own. But if we go back just one step, before that narrative fully takes hold, we slowly come to see that inside of her was a sense of being a little careless and then feeling a little exposed. That's what we begin to discover when I slow this stuff down. And this is what she begins to talk about. But instead of staying there, she moves from the one who could feel exposed to being the one who is exposing, to the one who is now in control of this situation. And that's the reversal that I alluded to again earlier. The roles reverse. And in that reversal, something in her gets restored. What gets restored for her? A sense of competence, a sense of control, a sense that he needs me. What would he do without me? Look at how important I am. And even a sense of superiority, one could argue. So the irritation that shows up in the moment, the urgency, the lecturing, the insistence that he should have done it differently is not just about the task itself. It may also be functioning to move her away from something more uncomfortable underneath it, and then to restore her own sense of superiority. As I just mentioned, that's what we came to understand. At the same time, it's important to say he's not a neutral figure in this. That's important for me to highlight, and I want to make sure that that too would get validated. There is something in the way he steps in, starts the task, or again, if you're filling this in your own mind, maybe he never even starts the task, and you have to keep nagging or asking him. But in any matter, he's not a neutral figure in this. He starts the task and then hands part of it back that can register only in her mind as what? Incomplete. So he doesn't complete the task. And one can say that could be perhaps a little provocative. Again, not intentionally. This stuff is not at the conscious level. So from his side, he may be communicating something like this. I'll help, but I'm not going to fully take this on because this is your mess. You should be doing this. Or in other situations or iterations of this, I'm above this task. This task isn't for me. You see, then maybe this has something to do with his own sense of superiority. So this isn't about one person being the problem. That's what I'm trying to emphasize here. And always, this is how this stuff gets more complicated. So this isn't about one person being the problem. It's about how each person, they have a way of engaging the moment that starts to organize the other person in their mind. In other words, he gets organized as the incompetent one and her as the superior one. But again, remember, she may have needed to do it that way because the way he handed back the task, or in some cases refuses to do it, subtly belittles the partner, again, as if I'm above this task. So, when we step back and look at this more comprehensively, the role reversal starts to make sense. I hope it's becoming clearer in your mind as well. The role reversal, it's not just a reaction, but it makes sense as something organized to protect her, and maybe him too, but to protect her from a much more vulnerable position. And just to be very clear, just to drive this home, in her lecturing him, referring to him as immature or a baby or a child, this is all designed to restore a sense of superiority. See, she's above him now, looking down at him. She's in control. And again, the story, the narrative in her mind is she's the competent one. If we take this just one step further, we can start to ask why she needs to take this particular, and I quote, superior position. I had just mentioned a moment ago that it's possible that he was taking the superior position and put her in an inferior position, and this could be a reaction to that. However, this conviction that she has to step up, this is her conviction, this is her inner narrative, that she has to step up, be the responsible one, manage, and make sure things get done, carries a very specific emotional charge for her. For many people, this role doesn't begin in the current relationship. It's not about the current moment. It's about something much older. If you grew up in an environment where you had to be the, and I quote, responsible one, and I've spoken about this a lot in terms of growing up with a covert narcissistic parent. Please listen to any of the episodes on that. But in any matter, if you grew up in this type of environment where you needed to be the responsible one, where things felt inconsistent, where you couldn't rely on someone else to follow through because you had to take care of it. So they could not follow through, whether that meant being picked up on time from school or having basic care and reliability. Those experiences don't just stay in the past. They start to link up with contemporary relational moments, and over time they form an internalized narrative. I'm the one who has to make sure everything gets done around here. I can't rely on someone else to carry this through. I'm the only responsible one. And from there, even a small moment, like having to explain how to finish a simple task, can carry an unconscious meaning that this is much larger than what's actually happening in the moment. In other words, why is it one has to wonder she just couldn't explain this simple task to him? Why did it take on such a severe charge? And what we begin to see as we unpack this, and what we begin to see here, are really two levels, and there are probably multiple levels. If we had more time, we could unravel this, but at least two levels operating simultaneously. On one level, there's a defensive movement away from a more vulnerable position. That's what we've been looking at thus far, where her own oversight, her own neglect, in other words, she left something in the fridge, let's say, hypothetically, or her own need to be taken care of might come into awareness, especially in the moment where he steps in and starts to clean up her mess. And on another level, there's a rapid reorganization into a familiar role, where she's no longer the one who might need care or correction, but the one who is responsible, competent, and in control of how things should be done. So what I'm getting at there in a very subtle way is she is not able to be in a more dependent position. Anyway, to go full circle, what initially looks like irritation about her boyfriend not completing a task turns into something much more complex. It's protecting her from the experience of dependency while simultaneously restoring a sense of being the one who is the, and I quote, adult in this situation. Hopefully, This gives you a way of thinking about these moments a little differently, of slowing them down and asking not just what's happening here on the surface, let's get beyond the manifest level here, but what might be getting stirred underneath inside of you. As always, there's still so much more I could say about this, but we have to begin to wrap it up. If something here didn't quite land or felt confusing to you, feel free to reach out and let me know. I'll be glad to clarify it. Okay, everyone, until next time, bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.